Good morning, everyone. NU. How's NU doing this morning? I can't hear you. Where did I show up? How's NU doing? Awesome. Great. Well, for Professor Rao, Mr. Pawar, members of the faculty, but most importantly, all of you, good morning. Great to be here. Delighted to be here. You know, I'm always amazed every single day, right, what happens in India. And this morning, Mr. Pawar was kind enough to, invite me here, and I left home at 7. And, in the last hour and a half, I've learned something incredible that's happening right here on your campus, right, which is this incredible institution that was launched 9 years ago, where all of you have decided that you're going to spend 4 or 5 years to become, hopefully, what will, 10 or 15 years from now, we'll all think of each of you as incredible leaders of India. So every single day I'm impressed about what's happening in India. The topic of my talk for today is what's happening in the digital economy in India, right? But before I get into that, I thought I'd share maybe a story that I wish somebody had told me when I was your age, sitting at either MIT or Stanford, which is think about what's going to happen in the world for the next 20 or 30 years, right? Because in many ways, there are a lot of things you will not be able to predict. You won't be able to predict, which city you're going to be living, or what job you're going to be doing, or how many, what's going to happen to a lot of friends and family. But by and large, you'd be able to, if you really thought about it and, kind of reflected on it and did a lot of research and talked to a lot of people about it, you'll be able to figure out where the world is going to go in the next 20 or 30 years, right? And thinking through that and then focusing your time on energy on whichever parts of that 20 or 30 vision of the world that you get excited about actually is very, very important. I didn't do very many things when I was in college. Actually, very rarely went to class. I'm told here you have to actually show up. That's a great thing, by the way, right? I did a few things right, but there were a lot of things I didn't do. But one of the things I actually didn't do was to think about where the world was going to go in 20 or 30 years, right? And in 1992, when I graduated from Stanford, as the internet was being invented, in Silicon Valley, I got up and moved to Chicago. Look, it wasn't a bad move. Here I am, right? It wasn't a bad move, but it wasn't the greatest move, right? It wasn't the greatest move. And why did I do that? Actually, because I hadn't really thought about, despite being in 2 of the best engineering schools in the world, I hadn't really thought about where the world was going to go in 20 and 30 years, right? Steve Jobs had invented Apple. Bill Gates was building Microsoft, right? Whole bunch of companies in Silicon Valley were doing things that were going to shape the future of the world. It was, 8 years or 7 years before Google was born. But I hadn't really thought about it. The reason I went to Chicago was I needed a job. And I managed to land a job at McKinsey, so I went to Chicago. It was the right near-term thing to do. It was either that or be unemployed, I suppose. But actually, what was a really interesting thing? I didn't even try to get a job with a startup in Silicon Valley in 1992. And the reason I didn't is because I hadn't spent enough time thinking about where the world was going to go in 20 or 30 years. So about 10 years ago, I decided I'm just going to think a lot about where the world's going to go. I'm going to be wrong most of the time, but some of the time I'm going to be right with some of my perspectives. And that is where I want to be. And so that really brings me to this topic, which is the Indian internet. There are a few things you can tell about the world for the next 20 or 30 years, right? As you kind of decide to either build your own companies or go work for other companies. One thing you can say for sure is that everybody, everywhere in the world is going to be on the internet. About 3 or 4 months ago, 50% of the global population got connected. There are a little over 7 billion people in the world. We crossed the magic number of 3.5 billion connected users on the internet, right? 50%. What does that mean? There's another 50% to go. That's incredible, right? There are over 3.5 billion people in the world that are not connected to the internet. The world has its first trillion-dollar company, Apple. They've got another 3 or 4 that are between $800 and $900 billion of market value. Apple, Amazon, Microsoft. There's about another 3 or 4 companies that are now north of 400 billion market cap, again tech companies. This has all happened with only 50% of the world connected to the internet. So that we know is going to happen, right? It's just a matter of time. So as you think about the next 10, 15, 20 years, one thing you know for sure is more and more and more people are going to get connected to the internet, including every Indian is going to be on the internet, which is what I'll talk about. The other interesting thing is that the center of gravity for the universe, actually for our world, I can't comment on the universe, is going to move to Asia. It's already started happening, right? China with over $10 trillion of a GDP, second largest economy, depending on which research report you're reading, somewhere between 2030 and 2040, China will surpass the US as the largest economy in the world. Actually, China is very interesting, and everybody knows that story. What's a lot more interesting is that 40 to 50% of worldwide GDP in the next 15 years is actually going to be in Asia. So that's interesting. How many of you knew that last month, India's GDP surpassed that of France? Did any of you know this? Yeah, okay, cool. I guess that's good. Actually, I told my team that, and they were like, okay, so what? Actually, maybe that's not interesting. But an even more interesting thing is before the end of this year, the overall GDP in US dollar terms, right? It's not PPP terms. I'm assuming any of you in the room study economics grads in the room? There are a few, right? Okay. So, PPP. So I actually don't look at PPP. I just look at absolute dollars, only because it gives me a real comp. So on an absolute dollar basis, India's GDP will surpass the UK this year. Now, that's interesting, right? Okay. By 2025, India's GDP will be twice the size of the UK. So whether it's Brexit or not, if you actually thought about the world and thought about the next 20 or 30 years, what are the countries you may not want to go to? No, this is really important, right? Because when I was I wouldn't have thought about these things. These are all things that are going to happen in the next 15 to 20 years, right? And the third thing that's really, really interesting is that not just people getting to connected to the internet, but technology more broadly is going to impact every industry, every person, and everything. And we haven't even started yet, right? And I'll share some examples of what that could mean for you. So I just thought I'd start with that because if there's nothing else that you do, whether you're here for another year or you're here for 4 years, is spend some time, not a lot of time, because I know all of you are very, very busy, just trying to answer this question of where is the world going, right? Some of it you'll be right, some of it you won't be right, but there are some things that are almost guaranteed to happen. And by the way, there are always going to be bumps in the road. India's GDP never grows at 7.5%. It grows between 5 and 8. But it's okay. At 5%, India becomes the third largest economy in the world by 2030. Most of you wouldn't have even hit 30 yet. So before you're 30, India becomes the third largest economy in the world. That's pretty cool. That is like really, really cool, right? So I just encourage you to think about that. Okay, so now let's get to the topic of my talk, which is what is happening with the internet and the internet economy in India. Where is it likely to go? And I'll end by giving you a sneak preview, or rather a short overview of what as Google in India we're trying to do. So the internet in India is now mainstream, right? 400 million Indians are connected to the internet. And this is the Indians that have used the internet at least once, okay? About 400 million. About 300 million are connected to smartphones. Actually, that number is more like 330 million smartphone users connected to the internet. The Reliance launched a Geo feature phone. How many of you have a Geo phone? Anybody have a Geo phone? Oh, not bad, a couple of you. There are about 30 million of you out there that actually have a Geo. So you have about 330 million connected smartphones, 30 million connected feature phones. So you end up with about more like 360 million mobile connected users. And on average, every connected smartphone user today consumes about 8 gigabytes per user per month. How many of you actually measure how much data you consume? What are some averages? Anybody who's above 8? Most of you are above 8. It's okay, you can raise your hands. Your faculty can't see you, so it doesn't matter anyway. There you go, right? Most of you actually consume more than 8 gigabytes. So across over 300 million Indians online, they're consuming 8 gigabytes per user per month. And I'll share with you how that compares with other countries, right? By 2020, the 400 million number is going to get to 650 million users. That's that's basically a little less than half of India connected. There'll be over 500 million smartphone users, and the data consumed per user per month will go to about 15 gigabytes, right? So it's a pretty large user base that is growing very fast, where the consumption on the internet is exploding, right? An important thing, if you haven't thought of it, is that by 2020, there'll be more internet users in India than the US population, right? That's actually pretty important. And by about 2025, there'll be 3 times as many internet users in India as the US population. So this is where the law of large numbers really begins to play in. On average, each of the over 300 million connected smartphone users spend 3 hours per day on their smartphones connected to the internet. I'm not going to even ask the question, how many of you spend more than 3 hours? It's 100% of you. 100% of you are spending more than 3 hours a day connected to the internet on your smartphones, right? But I want you to imagine what this means when you have over 300 million Indians spending 3 hours a day connected to their smartphones. It's a pretty large number. Not surprisingly, in a country where affordability is a big challenge, right? Because our GDP per capita is still about $2,000. Affordability is a big constraint. So more than 2/3 of the phones in India are phones that cost less than $150. In fact, when I joined Google in 2011, India had just crossed about 100 million internet users. But there were only 10 million smartphone users. And then sometime in the next 2 years or so, the cost of a smartphone came below 10,000 rupees. And we went from 10 million smartphone users to 100 million smartphone users. That is how price sensitive India is, right? And then about 2 or 3 years ago, the cost of a smartphone crossed 6,000 rupees. And we went from 100 million smartphone users to about 300 million smartphone users. The next big break point we think is about 2,000 rupees. We haven't yet been able to get the cost of a smartphone to 2,000 rupees. But what happened actually was Jio launched the feature phone at 1,500 rupees. And then now you've seen a big boom in connected feature phone users, right? So affordability is very, very key. You know, this is a very interesting point, because if you had asked me 3 years ago, before Jio launched, whether India would have 300 million 3G, 4G users by August of 2018, I would have said no way, right? Because we had barely 30 or 40 million 3G users before Jio launched. And here we are, less than a year. Isn't it amazing that it's less than a year? Have you guys even thought of this? It's less than a year. It's less than a year since Jio launched. 215 million Jio users, all on 4G networks, right? So broadband has definitely happened. And this is probably the most interesting chart when it comes to the Indian internet. Look at what has happened to the cost of data. And by the way, the reason all of you spend more than 3 hours a day on your smartphones is a slide on the right, or slide on the left, right? This is the pricing, the market price of a gigabyte of data. The market price of a gigabyte of data was about $3, actually more like $4, 240 rupees. Today it's 30 US cents, about 20 rupees a gigabyte. So 90% reduction in data costs, which has actually driven an 18x growth in data consumption, 18 times the total. So the Jio network in India today carries more data traffic than China Mobile, which has 750 million users, and more data traffic than all the US carriers combined. Right? So that's how much data this 350 million Indians are consuming. And then the last chart is very interesting. That actually looks at mobile data consumption per user and total data consumption per user by country. So if you look at the bar chart, right? India at 8 gigabytes per user per month. Now the connected mobile user in India is using more data than any other country in the world. But if you look at total data usage, which is the numbers in the bubbles, right? That includes Wi-Fi and fixed. We're still slightly behind, let's say, a country like the US. And the reason is because most homes are not connected. And that changed with the launch of GeoFiber, right? With GeoFiber, here's my guess. By December, that number changes. Not December of 2019, December of 2018, India will have more mobile plus overall data consumption than the US. And that's how quickly the internet is actually changing in India. Now, this massive explosion of mobile broadband has led to a growth that we have not seen as Google in the history of Google, for sure. Google was founded in 1999. What has happened in the Indian internet, we have not seen in the history of the internet. The kind of growth in users, of consumption, right? So if you look at online video, YouTube today has over 250 million users, right? Almost all of those are users who are accessing online video every single day. This is a massive, massive platform, right? So what you're seeing now with content is if you've got interesting content, your ability to get 1 million, 2 million, 10 million, 20 million users has changed dramatically. And I'll talk about what this means if you're trying to build a business, build a brand, etc. But YouTube, much like India, is not one India, right? India is really about many Indias. And this is a slide that's probably less relevant to you. Shows you it's not just about one state, it's not about one language, it's really about all of India, right? So YouTube and online video has grown all of India. And this is pretty interesting because as broadband has grown, what has happened is the time spent on video platforms has far exceeded the time spent on any other platform, right? It used to be that Facebook and social messaging was the entry point to the internet. That's what people got onto. Then it happened, then we switched to messaging was the entry point to the internet. But as broadband has grown dramatically, what we're seeing now is India has become now a video-first internet market, right? Because video is cheap. People understand video, and especially these new internet users that are coming online, they actually get to online video and they start watching online video. So this actually looks at average watch time per user, you know, YouTube versus Facebook, and you can draw these numbers, online video versus any other sort of social platform, you'll pretty much see the same curve. So this is actually, again, one of the reasons this is happening is video is getting very affordable. But it's not just video, right? Every single part of the Indian internet is growing very, very rapidly. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. If you look at search, 58% growth in search queries off a very massive user base. India today is a massive, massive search market for Google. Not surprisingly, 86% of search queries are coming from mobile devices. And not surprisingly, 60% of search queries are coming from outside of the top 8 cities, right? So India is no longer about metros. It's no longer about young Indians. It's about all Indians everywhere. But we're still getting started because there are only 400 million Indians and we have to get to 1.3 billion Indians. The other really, really important trend is the growth of the non-English internet. There are only about 200 million Indians who speak English, who are proficient in English, right? Last month, India added about 10 million daily active new smartphone users. Probably the single most important to keep in mind about these new users who came online, we all know they're on mobile, they don't have access to desktops. None of them are proficient in English. None of them. None of the new users who are coming onto the internet are proficient in English. So what does that mean? Explosive growth in the non-English internet, right? So if any of you are trying to build a startup, video, non-English, right? You're hopefully taking that away. Because look at what's going to happen, right? 200 million, this is the 400 million internet users that we have today, about half of them are proficient in English. But look at what happens by 2020. There'll be as many Hindi-speaking Hindi internet users as there are going to be English internet users, but another 200 million in other Indian languages, right? Look at the next stat. Non-English queries in India are growing 10x faster than English search queries in India. And by the way, when you think about this, it's not surprising. Why? Because most of India actually doesn't speak English, right? And then you can look at some other stats like content watched on YouTube. Video is big, local languages are big, but the really big new thing is voice. Voice is exploding on the internet. In India, we announced a stat in December of 2017. If you look at the Google search queries in India and look at the search queries from the Google search app, which is how most people in India search, 28% of all search queries now are voice triggered. How many of you do voice search? Okay. I see the front row. You all really need to start using voice. This is how India is searching now. This is now India is interacting, right? And when you look at the user behavior of the 30 million Indians who have basically started using the Geo phone, it is entirely voice. This new user does not like to type, certainly does not want to tab, wants to speak and wants to watch. That's the user behavior, right? So the feature phone has really brought on, and the Geo feature phone, the connected feature phone, has really brought on the new wave of the Indian internet, which is really going to be which is basically a voice-driven internet. So I started talking about this about 3-4 months ago, is India is certainly going to be the world's first voice-driven internet, where every interaction is going to be voice, right? You'll speak to your phone, you'll speak to the internet, your responses are going to be in voice, the whole thing is going to become a voice-driven internet. So this is another huge trend that we're seeing. A few other trends that are pretty important, I mean, you all read about this a lot. Flipkart got sold for $21 billion. Walmart paid $16 billion to buy 77%, right? Why did Walmart pay $21 billion? Not for Flipkart's current GMV. Their GMV is about $7 billion, as many of you know, and Economic Times loves to write about. They still lose money. Yes, all true. Actually, the reason they paid $21 billion is to be able to win a market that's going to be a $200 billion market, right? And this is actually pretty important because despite everything that has happened in the Indian internet, we're still in the first inning of a 5-test series when it comes to the Indian internet, right? It's still very early. You look at what's happening this year, the total e-commerce market is only going to be $20 billion. This is gross merchandise value. By 2025, it'll easily be at least 200 billion, most likely much larger than 200 billion. So there's going to be a 10x growth in e-commerce over the next 10 years. But not just e-commerce, actually. What's really interesting about digital behavior when it comes to the Indian consumer and commerce is not people buying online, is how the internet is impacting user behavior for purchasers offline, right? If you think about all of you and your buying behavior today, right? Yes, you're probably buying some stuff online, but actually a lot more times you're probably doing research on products you want to buy offline, online, right? So it's this idea of online research impacting offline behavior. 20% of pre-launch bookings on one of the biggest car launches happened online. You know, this is over the last couple of months. And now what we're seeing is even in mass brands, soap, shampoos, shaving razors, digital marketing is able to impact offline sales. So we think this actually is going to be the next mega thing that's going to happen, which is digital impacting offline sales of soaps, of cars, of motorcycles, you name it, right? So this is actually a pretty big phenomenon. And that is going to be enabled, what I mean by that is online and offline transactions are going to be enabled by digital payments. You've all read about Paytm, you've probably read about PhonePe. I hope how many of you use Tez? Okay, about half the room. About our market share. We'd like it to be higher, just kidding. This is actually a research that we did before demonetization happened, okay? Any of you remember before demonetization? Actually, most of you are what, in like middle school? High school? High school, right. We did this before demonetization. We came out and said that by 2023, 50% of all consumer transactions are going to be non-cash, and the digital payments industry is going to be about $500 billion, right? What's actually going to happen is it's going to happen much, much faster than that. I don't know how many of you know, but UPI-enabled transactions now growing 30% month on month, right? So India is going to be a fully digital economy, at least for the first 300-400 million users over the next 3 or 4 years. But actually, digital payments is the enabler. Digital payments is not the end game, right? So the reason that whether it's companies like Paytm or PhonePe or others are actually driving very large install bases of digital payments transactions is not just to get people to digitally transact. But once you actually get people and businesses to transact digitally, what's going to happen is you're going to unleash a massive digital lending market. So Google with BCG, we published a research, some of you may have read this, about a month ago, where we said that over the next 5 years, online lending in India is going to be about $1 trillion. So between now and 2023, there's going to be $1 trillion of digital lending in India. And this is end-to-end digital lending, right? So if you look at 5 years combined. So this is actually going to be massive, because what's going to happen is within 30 seconds, you're going to be able to get a personal loan. I don't mean all of you, but in general, if you have, a transaction history, etc. Right? So what today would take several days has already come down to minutes, right? With the advent of UPI and Aadhaar and so on. Actually, what you're now going to see is the 2 or 3 minutes going to seconds. I don't know how many of you know this, but the State Bank of India today can issue a new loan in 3 minutes. The large Indian banks, public sector and private sector in India today, can give you a loan faster than any bank anywhere in the world. And all of this has happened in 3 years. If you went back 3 or 4 years ago, getting a loan from State Bank of India took weeks. And then, if it was a small personal loan, it took you days, right? Now they do it in 3 minutes. And what enables that really is technology and the India stack, which has been built by the government, which has been really quite awesome. So that really gives you a view of what's happening in the internet. I think the big thing to take away is, look, it's a large user base. It's going to get much larger. And as we look at the next 5-10 years, the behavior of these users is going to be very different to all of you. Local languages, video, voice, even cheaper phones, right? And building products for this type of user is quite different. The other interesting thing about the big question for India really is, in a world that is moving towards artificial intelligence, machine learning, what is India's role to play, right? Because every forum that I'm a part of, whether it's a government forum or a private sector forum, the discussion always boils down to, China now is leading the world in AI because they're investing, billions and tens and hundreds of billions of dollars into AI. The US has all these research institutions that actually are investing in computer science, etc. Where does that leave India? Before I talk about AI, I'll tell you one example of where that could leave India. TCS, right, the services company that Tata owns, became the first $100 billion Indian company. Here's what's really interesting about TCS. TCS didn't invent the operating system. TCS didn't invent the processor. TCS didn't invent middleware. TCS certainly didn't invent the internet. TCS didn't build a search engine. TCS didn't build a social network. What did they do? They leveraged existing technologies to solve big problems for big companies. And they did it exceptionally well. So the near-term opportunity for India in AI is very, very similar. It's not to actually win the race in core underlying AI technologies. It's to actually leverage existing AI technologies and the incredible amounts of data that we have in India to solve India-specific problems, right? That is the opportunity that we have, because we have 1.3 billion people, because increasingly with the advent of Aadhaar, with UPI, India Stack, GST, right? We have these incredible amounts of data. We can actually use that data to leapfrog many use case applications of AI, and this is really, really important. How does this apply? I'll give you just a few examples. I'm not going to give you lots of examples. Here's HDFC. HDFC uses a bot called Eva, right? They built it off the Google Assistant. That basically does automated customer service, right? So for a company to have thousands of people in call centers is an old idea. You don't need that anymore, right? Today you can actually build bots that pretty much operate like, for customer service, right, which are pretty routine use cases that pretty much operate like customer service channels. This is actually a very simple use case of AI. There are startups in India that are going to build companies with $50, $100 million of software revenue just doing this. Taking AI, using, let's say, Google's Dialogflow and engines like that, building off that applications and use cases for large companies, right? And this is just in India. You can imagine doing this for every bank, every insurance company, etc. Very, very simple use case, adds tremendous value for large businesses, for small businesses, for medium-sized businesses, etc. But more than that, what's actually very interesting and much more interesting is what startups could do, or what startups are doing, but really what startups could do by using AI and ML, machine learning and artificial intelligence, to solve problems at scale, right? I'm assuming some of you have heard of some of these names on the page, but I'm going to just pick one. SIG-tuple. How many of you are familiar with SIG-tuple? Not a single person. Wow. Okay. It is an extremely interesting startup. How many of you are doing CS? Anybody doing machine learning, data science? The company to go work for is that one, if you want to work for a company, right? Here's what they're doing. India, so let me start with the problem statement, right? Oh, you're writing it down? Okay, great. Send me an email, I'll connect you with them. Here's the problem statement they're starting with, right? India, with the population of 1.4 billion, doesn't have enough hospitals or doctors, right? We just don't. And it's highly unlikely that we'll ever get to a point where we'll have enough hospitals in terms of infrastructure and hospitals. And even if we did, the kind of equipment that these hospitals can afford, given the affordability of patients, is just not there, because all the diagnostic equipment is very, very difficult. So SIG-tuple does a very, very straightforward use case of AI and ML. They use AI to make medical diagnostics much, much cheaper, right? Because AI essentially lets you train a machine, build models, train models, right? Things like image recognition, you can do all kinds of use cases. So this is actually a medical devices startup in India that is using AI to bring high quality diagnostics that is as good, if not better, than the best practitioners in the world to rural India at 1/100th the cost. That is the product, right? We have 630,000 villages in India. We will never be able to build enough clinics, enough hospitals, enough doctors, right? But imagine if you could get the world's best doctor in a machine that costs very little, train social workers who are all in, or NGO workers who are in all these villages to be able to take these devices to those villages. A very, very focused problem, taking AI and using it again, right, for an India-specific problem. And by the way, this is not, already they've started expanding outside of India, because once you actually do that, you can think about taking these kinds of products all over the world, right? So these are examples from a whole bunch of different industries of startups that are using AI and ML in very interesting ways. Over the next 10 or 15 years, what we are going to see is startups using technology in very, very interesting ways, right, to solve the biggest problems of India, right? Selling Samsung phones to all of you is not the biggest problem to be solved in India, right? The first company that got sold for $20 billion, which is Flipkart, solved that problem. How to make all of you buy a Samsung phone now, cheaper. That was the problem, right? E-commerce for urban India, young urban India. You can afford to buy a Samsung phone. You could, usually you'd go out and buy it, but they made it faster, cheaper, gave you an amazing experience, and that problem was worth $20 billion to Walmart. That's why they bought Flipkart. But actually, the biggest problems of India are not the problems that all of you face, or most of you face. The biggest problems of India don't have to do with what I call India 1, right? India 1 is the first 100 million Indians of India. High income, educated, generally live in urban India, speak English. Pretty much characterizes most of you. Maybe some, by the way, you don't have to be just it could be urban, tier 1, tier 2 India. The biggest problems of India are in these kind of sectors, right? Agriculture. 50 million households are farming households. That doesn't include all the farm labor. Most of them farm on very small plots of land. Most of them can barely make a living, and most of them don't really have the productivity that Israel had even 30 years ago, right? Imagine the kinds of things that you can do. Then I can talk about some of the startups in that space. Financial inclusion. In a country that is, India today has a massive credit gap, right? Despite everything that has happened, private sector, public sector, all the fintech companies, all the payments banks, the reality is today, both on the consumer side as well as on the business side, India has a credit gap that's in the hundreds of billions of dollars today. Right? And it's only going to grow as India's population grows. So how do you use technology, business models in new and interesting ways to be able to tap into that? Public transport. The $100 billion on-demand startup from India in transport is not going to be built on cars or bikes or rickshaws. It's going to be built on buses. You know why? Because most of India wants to spend 3 to 5 rupees. They don't want to spend 20 rupees. And if you give it to them at 5 rupees, you know what happens? You have to raise $2 billion of venture capital. You guys all understand, right? You give it to 5 rupees, you lose 15 rupees on every order, therefore you get venture capital to be able to do that. And the minute you raise prices from 5 to 20 rupees, boom, everybody goes back to the bus. So I want you to imagine a network of 1 million buses. They're all electrically powered. They've got all the web interface, on demand, all of that. And because they're electric, because they're new, and because you optimize them based on traffic patterns and by applying AI, ML, etc. But remember, it's a bus business. You can dramatically change, massively change the entire transport ecosystem in India. But that's just one example, right? India will actually see thousands of transport-specific startups that are each going to be worth a huge amount because we have so many transportation problems, right? Education, I think all of you know. We'll never have enough schools, enough teachers. I mean, you're all very, very privileged in every sense of the word to be here, right? But the reality is there are 200 million students in India, most of whom can't get quality education, and you could use technology and delivery in interesting ways to change that. Finally, healthcare. I've given you one example, but the reality is there are thousands and thousands of healthcare-related problems in India that you can solve, not just through internet and AI and ML, right? By different devices, healthcare systems, healthcare delivery, and so on and so forth. So this is actually pretty important because a lot of people ask me, look, the potential for tech startups, is it over? Because I can't launch another e-commerce company. I can't. Well, I say, no, actually, it hasn't even started. Because the really mega companies, right? The mega companies, $50, $100, $200, $300 billion valuation companies, the startups of India, are not going to be built by building for all of you. Good news and bad news. It's actually going to be built by entrepreneurs who deeply understand real India, who deeply understand these mega problems that all of us have. Now what I'm going to do is spend a couple of minutes on our mission. So not surprisingly, our mission is internet for every Indian. Right? So as Google in India, we are squarely focused on figuring out how do we get every single one of the 1.4 billion Indians connected to the internet. That is our singular mission that we have, right? And what we've tried to do over the last, I'd say 3 or 4 years, is try to understand in a very fundamental way what are the barriers of getting every single Indian on the internet and systematically address every single one of the barriers, right? So I won't go through all the things that we're doing, but at a simplistic level, right? Connectivity used to be a big barrier. So we launched this initiative where we partnered with RailTel to launch high-speed, free public Wi-Fi in railway stations. Today we are in 400 railway stations. There are about 300 million Indians, by the way, who go through these railway stations. 400 railway stations, 300 million Indians. Imagine that, right? Today in those stations, I don't know whether you've tried RailTel, Google Wi-Fi, and now you'll see us expanding Wi-Fi going way beyond railway stations, right? Everywhere. Wi-Fi everywhere is something you'll see from us. The second is we've made sure that we've tried to focus on making our products work in Indian constraints, right? Local languages, offline, fast. How do your products work on slow networks, etc. Give you an example. YouTube. We took YouTube offline in India about 3 or 4 years ago. Fastest growing feature we ever launched, right? Even today, despite Jio, despite all the connectivity, offline consumption of the internet is still growing like this. Why? Because even though we are a 4G nation, there are many parts of India where you can't get 4G or 3G or any connectivity, right? It's still patchy in many places, so if you look at your own behavior, I'm sure many of you actually do offline. How many of you have tried a new app called Google Go? Anybody tried Google Go? A few of you have. You should try it. It's an entirely ground up designed, basically it's a search experience that is not what you're used to. It's not just a search bar. So try it, just download it, try it. We basically built it for India. Third big pillar is getting SMBs online. There are about 51 million small businesses in India. Most of them are not online, right? See, what will happen is if you get all the consumers online, but there isn't enough content and there isn't enough products or services from small businesses, the internet is not as useful. So we have a huge focus on getting small businesses online. Skilling for the future, we have a huge focus on skilling, advanced skilling, mobile skilling, AI, ML, etc. Again, a lot of it is online driven. We've built a lot of online content. We are getting it out there so that, again, right, our focus here is how do we get more and more developers in India to build for India, right? Because that's where we see the big opportunity as Google is building for India. And then the last one really is digitizing rural India. So about 3 years ago, we launched an initiative with Tata Trust, right? It's an initiative called Internet Sati, where we are going village by village we recruit women from rural India, from those villages, we train them, we give them 5 or 6 smartphones, and we give them a stipend where they can spend 5 or 6 days a week in their village plus one more village, going house by house, helping women understand what the internet can do, helping them learn how to use a smartphone, figuring out what the applications are, etc. Because one of our big insights was most of rural India is not connected, especially among women, partly because of access, partly because of understanding, partly because of social pressures. And we said, look, instead of just talking about it, let's just deploy a massive rural network to try to change that. And so far, I've shared with you some of the statistics. This is a 10 or 15-year journey. We've been at it now for a couple of years, but we see this as, we're going to be at this for the next 10 years. We'll change some of our initiatives. But if you look at Internet Sati, we are now in 170,000 villages. In fact, next week on Tuesday, we have a big event where we'll announce the next. We've actually higher than that, but 170,000 villagers. We have over 50,000 full-time women who are in these villages, right? So I want you to imagine, this is actually not a digital network. This is a human network. We have 50,000 Internet Satis across 170,000 villagers. They've trained 17 million of them. On the small business side, GMB is a product that we have for small businesses. We have about 4 million businesses who have created websites using this GMB product. We have all kinds of trainings for them, and so on and so forth. So that's really what we're up to. But we are incredibly optimistic, right? Because as I said, when I was your age, I didn't give any thought to where the world's going to go. Now, I think I kind of have some view of where it's going to go. And one of the things that's going to define the world is the internet. The other thing that's going to define the world is India. So that really is the Indian internet. Thank you. Shall we open it up for, should we open it up for questions? Yeah. By the way, in our industry, we say the time is now all the time.
I'm going to sit here and then watch the questions.
Sure, yeah.
Now you guys will have to work of passing it back and forth because the stake is out there. So, few show of hands so we can organize the mic movement. Who are ready with the first question? The mic is go a long way. We will set on mic, but a few other questions so we can get. Why don't we start? That will take some time to reset in, so there is a second question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning, sir. I'm Neha Tiwari. I am assistant professor here in electronics and communication engineering. So, like apps are trending nowadays like anything. So, and with the advent of AI and ML, how do you perceive the future of these apps in the coming years?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Look, I think what will happen if you look at apps were born in the world of the mobile web, right, with the smartphone, mobile web, etc. I think what you'll see now is moving into a world of voice-triggered assistance, right? So let's take a specific use case, right? If you want to book a taxi today, you basically switch on your smartphone, you open Ola or Uber, you then pick the pick where you enter where you want to go, you pick which credit card you want to pay from, and then you order, right? Look, the next evolution of let's say the taxi booking app is you say, okay, Google, book me a taxi, going home. That's it, because and it does everything else, right? So I think voice-triggered assistance, right, is probably where it's going to go, and then I think beyond that, I mean, probably in the next 5 years, right, we'll get to a point where everything is connected. I mean, my jacket's going to be connected, my glasses are going to be connected, etc. And all these things, by the way, they go through hype cycles, right? People say, oh, we've tried that. Yeah, we've tried that. But remember, they go through hype cycles. So I think the next near term, next 2-3 years, it's going to be these voice-triggered actions. And so that still means you need to have the product. But the actual interface, the look and feel of the product, the user flow, all of those things will change to. I mean, the whole move now is how do you make it now? I don't want to make 3 or 4 steps to get to what I want to get to, right? I want to just say, look, play me the Chris Martin video X now. That's it. I just talk to it, boom, it plays, right? Which is what you're seeing with Alexa and Google and a bunch of these companies doing. But what you'll see is developers building those kinds of capabilities into their products.
Okay, so that's the second one, but on this side, if there's a question, the mic can reach you. Any question on this side?
There's one up here, no?
Yeah, we'll come. So that mic
Oh.
can go get in the meeting. Just go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, sir. Abhishek here. I have a question related to Google Duplex. Yeah, and the question is what Google thinking about starting Google Duplex in India? What all will be obstacle in starting the Duplex in India? And one more thing, I was going through some news and all. What I found that when Google Duplex will come in India, it will kill millions of BPO jobs. And what Google will be thinking about the people who will be losing the job after starting Google Duplex.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. My view is, look, Duplex is super interesting, but is not in the top set of things that we'd like to do, right? If you look at our mission, is internet for every Indian, right? And in a country with 1.4 billion people, where only 400 million of them are connected, our big priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, is to get 1 billion Indians online. Duplex doesn't help me there, right? Low-cost phones, better usability, local languages, voice triggering, all these kinds of things, right? Duplex is a very useful thing for small, for business to consumer sort of interaction. So it'll come, but it's not currently something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. I think on your second question, look, it's not about Google technologies, right? And this is what I meant by thinking deeply about where the world is going, right? Not just from a technology standpoint, but non-tech as well. Look, the reality is automation has started, but on a scale of 1:100, we're still at 1. In terms of what software automation can do to industries, to companies, to jobs, right? So today I shared the example with Eva, which is a customer service bot that can pretty much do most of what a BPO voice customer, level 1 customer service operator could do, right? So I think the way I think about it is, these technology-driven advancements are going to happen. It doesn't matter whether it's Google, Microsoft, Amazon, startup XYZ. Actually, a lot of it is going to come now increasingly from Indian startups. I think what companies and also people need to do is make sure that they're retraining these people for future jobs, right? Because the reality is the kind of jobs that will exist 5 or 10 years from now will be very, very different, right? And what I think it's really the responsibility of companies, but also really people, right? Is how do you reskill yourselves for different kind of jobs, because assuming that it's not going to happen, that is a bad assumption, because it's going to happen, right? It's like what I said, right? I could have predicted in 1992 sitting at Stanford what was going to happen. I just didn't. I was too focused on the wrong thing. I was focused on getting a job as opposed to trying to figure out where the world was going to go and how I can be on the ground floor. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any other question this side? To the next person? On this side, the mic can travel there in the middle. You have
And there's a question there, we can send them.
So let's see that question, then we'll come to you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
My name is Arpit, sir. I have a question Google have a project called Google Loon.
Yeah.
So what is the future of Google Loon since given the barriers of net neutrality that the Indian government have rejected all the claims of having a differential traffic-based internet?
Yeah, it's a good question. By the way, so Google Loon has nothing to do with net neutrality, right? I think you're referring to Facebook Zero, where they basically had a Facebook app. So Loon, think of Loon as you deliver the full internet from a balloon. Okay, so those of you that don't know Google Loon, we have these balloons, they go up 19 kilometers up in the sky. It's your last mile network. It's basically very powerful for connecting rural India, right? It is the full internet. There's no, it's not partial, right? It's a full internet. It's pretty reasonable internet. It's full internet. There's no wall gardens. There's none of that. Look, as we speak, some of you may have read this. We are launching in Africa. This year, towards the end of this year, we'll launch in Africa. We're very keen, actually. I've been talking to the Indian government for the last 3 or 4 years to have Loon launched here because, clearly it can help in India with so many rural villages. But, it's a bit complicated in India because, you need to get civil aviation approvals, IT ministry, defense. So we continue to work on it. I think, as with all things, it will happen in India. It's only a question of when.
Just one more complimentary question. Like you said, there would be no compartmentalization of any data site. So does Google is gonna have a speed with respect to, a speed of data with respect to certain apps that YouTube may have a higher?
No, first of all, first of all, today we are not a carrier, right? That's a telecom-driven decision. What you're referring to is called slow lanes, fast lanes, right? In the world of net neutrality. No, we are massive proponents of net neutrality. We would never, for instance, right, in railway stations, because we have these Google Wi-Fi networks, we don't have fast lanes and slow lanes. We are not at all supporters of slow lanes and fast lanes. We want fast lanes for everyone. Yeah.
Question there?
There's a question in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, pass the mic.
Oh, there's
that
mic.
side, whoever the next question, please move the mic. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Anandan. I would like to ask.
Just identify your discipline and year as well, just to get the time.
Yes,
Your year and which discipline.
He wants to know. I don't need to, but go ahead.
BTech third year, CSE. Sarthak Tripathi. I wanted to know that even though Google is working so hard for connectivity for all the Indians, but where does things like security and privacy stand? Because if someone who is from a village does not know much of how internet works and gets his PC infected with some kind of bot or any kind of malware, it affects the whole internet if he joins any DDoS network or anything. So how is Google trying to tackle this problem? Because the responsibility will lie with Google or whoever is enabling the access to the internet.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Look, so there are two parts to the answer, right? I think first, from a privacy standpoint, right, we want to make sure that you as a user, for every user, you're able to decide what data you want to share, what data you want to keep, what data you want to delete. So I don't know how many of you tried Google My Settings, right? So you can go in there, by the way, you'll know all the data that Google has on you. You can decide which of those data you want to delete. You can decide you don't want Google to have any of that data. You can port it and so on and so forth, right? So the first big focus we've had is how do we give you as a user complete control of your data? So that is solved. But now what we need to do is on that particular thing, we need to build a lot more awareness because very few people actually know. How many of you know about this? Very few, right? So there you go. So we need to build a lot more awareness about this so that people understand that their data is their control. So that's one part. The second is how do you make the open web secure, right? And for that, what we're doing is we plus other internet companies, we are partnering with lots of different NGOs and so on and so forth to build awareness, right? So I talked to you about the Internet Saathi initiative, right? Where we are now in 170,000 villages. One of the things that Saathis they do is, it's a digital literacy program, right, where we're training women in these rural villages, is actually to think about how do you identify malware? What do you do to make sure that you keep your account safe? What do you do to keep your device safe, right? So it's really a awareness building education type program. And then obviously whether it's Google and or others, we have massive amounts of effort, right, focused on securing our platforms, whether it's Gmail, YouTube, so on and so forth. But I would say when it comes to privacy and the particular question that you asked, it's really a combination of giving users control of their data. Total control, right? Today, very few people realize you can pretty much take all your data and pour it out. That's it, it's gone. We won't know anything about you, right? That's the level of privacy we've got to. And then the other one really is awareness building. And I'd say that is the harder part, right? When you have 300, 400, 500 million users, how do you make sure that everybody knows, right, how to keep your internet presence secure and safe? But it's the hard work of awareness building. We just have to do more and more and more of it.
Startup idea to get secure for 1 rupee.
There was a question here, if you can get a mic right in the middle. Yeah, to you. Have you? Oh, you asked the question? Okay.
Now the mic is there.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, on this side, whoever needs the mic, just say.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
So my name is Sunana Bansal from IDS batch. So I have a question, like in this current era when almost every technological giant is working around AI, like Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, how Google AI is unique, how Google AI is different from them?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, so I think, look, this is a field, right? In many ways, it's going to be the defining technology for the next 10 or 15 years, at least from a tech standpoint. So the way we think about it is, if you look at cloud offerings, right, from Amazon, from Microsoft, from Tencent or Ali and Google, because of all the advancements in AI that we've had, right, all our products, whether it's search, YouTube, etc., they use extensive amounts of AI. So what we are saying is, look, so let me give you some examples, right? So Google has 4 or 5 big APIs, right? So Translate API, Vision API, Speech to Text, etc., and we have a few more. These APIs, right? So today, if you're building, let's say, a Vision app, right? So you're building an app for security where you want to actually look at what's going on in your environment in real time, sort of, use Vision to translate that into threats, non-threats, and so on and so forth. You can build off Google's Vision API, right? It's an open API. Depending on how much you use, you pay or not. But the quality of that, as per external benchmarks, is significantly better than the APIs than similar offerings from other companies, right? So from a cloud standpoint, we are, because of the history that we have in some of these things, right? We believe we are slightly ahead in many ways in some of these areas, and our focus is going to be continue to invest, continue to advance in those spaces. See, the most important application of AI for Google, right, is how do we build AI into our products? Right? So for instance, if you look at the Google Assistant, it's probably the most advanced AI-based product that we have, right? Because it's speech to text, I'm talking to it. It's doing a bunch of other things, right? And things like search, this all driven by AI now. So I would say, and because it is so critical to our core products, right? Recommendations on YouTube, right? It's an AI-driven sort of platform. So all these things are basically AI-driven, and as we focus on investing in AI to make our products better, the underlying technologies get better, and that's when we open it up to the rest of the world for developers to go and use. It's a great question.
Next question is here, but Mike, can you just go ahead?
Good morning, sir. I'm Sneh from under IMT program. My question is that can be used? Sir, I'm Sneh from IMT program. My question is that can YouTube be used as formal education under rural areas?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think not just YouTube, right? But I think online video is a great platform for education, right? Especially to get some basic level of education and so on and so forth. I don't know whether, you talk about YouTube, but there's an app called Unacademy. Have any of you used Unacademy? Unacademy is now 100 million views, right? So 2-year-old company based in Bangalore. They have, I think, almost couple of 300,000 or 400,000 educators, right, who are sort of professionals who want to teach, or traditional educators, etc. They make it super simple for you to make reasonably high quality content using just a phone and things like that. So I think, look, online content, video based especially, can become very, very powerful for education in general, and including in rural India, right? I think what's important though, make sure it's in local languages, in the local dialect, and things like that. And that's why actually, if you think about it, only about 15% of rural India is connected to the internet today. That's why it's so important to get everybody online, right? Because if you're not online, it doesn't really help. So we are doing some pilots in rural schools to see if we can, partnering with some other companies to see if we can have a video-based platform that could be better. So it's a great question. Unacademy is, just raised 20 million and 80 million pre. So it's a $100 million company doing exactly what you just asked. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, sir. I'm Shubhang from the Integrated MBA batch. My question is, with the market already captured by Paytm and the other major vendors like PhonePe and MobiKwik associating themselves with other e-commerce company, how does Google plan to achieve market penetration?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Look, we launched Tez, right, last year. It's been less than a year now, maybe about 10 months. We have about 25% share of overall transactions already. And I think what we've really done is made firstly we built off UPI, right? PhonePe had launched, but Paytm was not on UPI. So we made it, bank-to-bank UPI-based transactions. We made those of you that have used Tez, the UI is very clean, it's pretty simple. We use more of a chat approach, right? And then we're, because we understand digital marketing, growth hacking, things like that, we were able to rapidly use the base. So I think the question less is, we're already at 20-30% share, right? I think the question now is how does the whole ecosystem, how do we go from, call it 70, 80 million transacting users to 300 million transacting users, right? That's the first big question. It's not just a Google thing, but as multiple players to do that. And then the bigger question is, how do you monetize this platform, right? Because as I mentioned, there's no money in payments. The money is in other things. So what are the other things that we can do?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one question here and then the mic. Is there somebody there?
Yeah, there's another question there too, over here.
So here, there,
Yeah, hi sir. My name is Akhilesh Agrawal. I look after the IT systems and IT initiatives here at NU. Some of the tech companies have programs where they can continuously collaborate with educational institutes like ours. Do you have anything in which we can have ongoing engagement with our students with Google?
Yeah, I think we have a few, right, where we do some research with PhD programs in computer science with some of the IITs, so we do that. We do a lot of work, and that's in India, right? We do a lot of work, obviously, in advanced healthcare, things like that, with the Stanfords, MITs of the world. I would say, it's not, we probably focus more in terms of digitizing K through 12 in India. That's been a big focus, right? Because we're trying to get internet connected. Probably not doing as much with universities, so that's something we should look at.
So,
hang on one sec there. He's picking who speaks next. You'll have to get his attention.
Oh, yeah. The mic there and then
hello? Hello, sir.
Yeah.
I'm Nikhil.
I see you. Hard to miss you.
Okay. I just want to means it's a basic question. I don't know whether everyone knows it or not. I want whether there could be a new internet or new thing called a decentralized network, and what are your views on that decentralized network? Whether it going to happen or people are just trying to work it on to bring it to call a new internet, to build their own new internet where no one can have the authority, not even a Google or Facebook, to rule the just to rule any and every candidate who are using or connected to the internet.
Sure. Yeah, it already exists. It's called the blockchain.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's the blockchain is all about like when it's more like cleaning to a cryptocurrency like thing.
No,
but
blockchain is the underlying. Crypto is just one use case for digital currency. So look, the reality is, if you want to build a new platform, you could build it off the blockchain. If you ask me, look, in the next 5 years, can somebody else develop a new kind of, the next generation of what blockchain is today, right? Absolutely. Look, I think the way to think about it is, we're still on the ground floor of this whole evolution, right? And, next 50, 100 years, we're going to see things happen that none of us can imagine, right? So today, for instance, right, if you want to do, let's say, peer-to-peer transactions, but you don't want to really, or let's say you want to do money transfers, but you don't really want to go through banks, right? You just use a blockchain app. So that's an example of, you're not tied down by regulation, you don't have to disclose who you are, all of those kinds of things. Now, India will at some point have regulation that'll tie down blockchain as well. But
so one more question, it's a silly one. It's just more like personal, like why you joined Google?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, right? As I said, when I was your age, I didn't think much about where the world's going to go for the next 20, 30 years. As I got a little older, I started thinking about that. And I said, look, it's pretty clear that I like technology industries, right? And I want to basically spend the next 20, 30 years, 40 years, as long as I can live. Hopefully science will, figure out how we can all live longer. Basically in the technology industry, right? And I said, if I want to be continue to be in the technology industry, I also want to try to be at the cutting edge of what's happening, right? And Google, fortunately, we are doing a lot of things in the cutting edge, right? And also, it's a cool company. We do lots of interesting things. So, yeah.
Question here, and then after that the mic goes to the then after that the question.
Yeah.
And probably one word in the last one.
Sir, my name is Pratinav Srivastav. I am from BTech second year batch, and I wanted to ask you at what point in your life or when did you decide, and how did you decide that this is what you will be pursuing? And did you ever think that this will be what I'll be doing for the rest of my life, or that thought never came into your mind?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, so, I have a philosophy, right, which is I do things that I'm really, really passionate about for as long as I'm passionate about it. And when I stop being passionate about it, I do something else, right? So it applies to companies that I've been in, right? At some point I may decide that, look, I'm done with Google. I'm not really, I want to do something different, right? Then I'll come and teach here. Then I'll come here, I might come and teach here. So I think that's sort of how I've done it, right? So as I said, look, when I graduated from Stanford, I needed to get a job, and I figured out I didn't know about investment banking. I hadn't obviously thought enough about technology to know I should have gone and joined some early stage startup in Silicon Valley, right? But then when I joined McKinsey, I really started enjoying it. So I did it for 11 years because I just loved what I did, right? So I have this thing which is find things that you love doing and do it for a long time, right? Because the way you get really good at something is to do it for a long time. And I did that for 11 years. I did very well. But towards the end of my last probably year or two, I started thinking about, is this what I want to do for the next 20 or 30 years? So I always ask myself, is this something I want to do for the next 20 or 30 years? At this point, I have said yes to, I certainly want to be in technology for the rest of my life, right? When I was at McKinsey, I loved being in consulting. But I decided to leave McKinsey because I said, I don't want to be a consultant for the next 20 or 30 years. I was always intrigued by people who ran companies, built businesses. So that's when I went to Dell, and I actually picked Dell only for one reason. Michael Dell had a history of taking senior consultants and putting them in big operating jobs. That was my only criterion. So I went and worked for him for a year, and then I ended up running stuff, right? So I tend to do things I'm very passionate about. I tend to be quite purposeful in terms of why I'm doing something. But then after I do it for some time, if I'm not totally passionate about it, then I'll change, because that's one thing, right? Whatever you're doing, do something that you're really passionate about and do it to be extraordinary. The easy thing to do, by the way, is you'll all get like 5 or 10 years from now, right? You'll be making decent money, you'll get really comfortable, you'll be like, why change? Don't ever let that happen to you, right? Complacent, satisfied is not a great thing for greatness. So this word, I'm satisfied. Don't get to that. Yeah.
There's a question
There's a question here.
Question there and then you
Okay.
So, sir, since you are an angel investor and you must be going through a lot of startups each and every day, people pitching you their startup ideas. So what are the things that you are looking for if you want to invest in a startup? Like, is it the problem? Is it the market opportunity? Like, what is it that you are looking for in a startup?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think the most important thing is the team. At the end of the day, look, startups are built by great teams, right? So I'm looking for, if it's a founding team of 2 people or 3 people, why do they want to do this, right? What skills do they bring to the table? Are they really, really passionate? So that's the first, by far the most important thing. Then I spend some time on the space, right? I want to make sure that it's a space where there's enough, there's enough opportunity to build something new, building interesting things. There are a lot of spaces, like, at any given point in time, I'm interested in some spaces, I'm not interested in other spaces, right? Because as an investor, I have themes that change over time. And the third one really is traction, right? I don't invest in business plans because, my view is if you're 2 or 3 really smart entrepreneurs and you're passionate about something, you should be able to, and today especially, and by the way, I only invest in tech, so I don't do retail, I don't do sort of consumer products and all of that. Because I understand tech, I only invest in things I understand. And so my view is today in technology, unless you're trying to build a rocket, you know, you should be able to get something going, right? With 2-3 smart engineers working on something, at least build a prototype, get it out there. So I'm looking for some level of validation that this team can build something and get some traction. So those are really the 3 things that I look for. And by and far, I mean, you talk to any investor, you know, they will say that 90% of the bet is on the team, right? I'm betting that here's a team of 2 or 3, you know, founders who can really build this business over the next 10 or 15 years.
Thank you, sir.
So the last question, I have to make it the last one, there are many more, but just wanted to know how many of you would like him to come here again to talk? Okay, so I didn't see.
You didn't also ask when, so 2030, I'm certainly coming back.
Is that when we were driving in, I was mentioning to him that I sense there's a lot of interest in at least being entrepreneurial, maybe becoming entrepreneurs. So I have asked Rajan to think about how he could help the university, and you think about that idea. So he's spending a little time with the entrepreneurship cell. But just to get a quick check, how many of you think you want to take a stab at doing a venture? Doing a startup? Oh, that's just a checking question. So last question, and then we do have to be mindful, to spend some time with people that has a little bit of particular time. We'll hold your question.
Good morning, sir. This
Hi.
is Parnika from Integrated MBA batch of 2018. So my question is, how do you see Google Plus taking up challenge with Facebook, as Google Plus is the social media alternative by Google?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Look, we've made several attempts at social. They haven't worked. So, and look, this is what happens in technology, right? You keep trying until it works. And also keep in mind, look, we don't have to win everything, right? We have to win some really important areas. So whether it's search, Android with phones, YouTube, mail, right? But it's a great question. Look, I mean, it clearly hasn't worked. I mean, we are not even close to a comparison with not just Facebook, whether it's Insta, I mean, all these other platforms, right, are doing very well. So social is one where it's a work in progress. Good question.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.